We ask, what is justice? This question has preoccupied philosophers for millennia. It is a question at the heart of philosophy itself. But this is a question that all of us, at one time or another, worry about. We worry about it when the rich get a tax break, when the price of healthcare goes up, or when a multi-billion-dollar company gets away with not paying its employees overtime. In such cases, we say things like, "That's not fair," "What an injustice," or my favorite, "That is so wrong." It seems that we all have an inkling as to what justice is and what justice is not. There are three ways to talk about justice. There is retributive justice, which deals with the principles that govern punishment. There's compensatory justice, which deals with the principles that govern compensation to victims. Finally, there's distributive justice, which deals with the principles that govern the distribution of benefits and burdens. We will concern ourselves with the last of these, distributive justice. Usually, we associate distributive justice with some or all of the following ideas: fairness, equality, desert, or rights. Now, justice as fairness. Something is unjust when it fails to treat everyone fairly. For instance, we think it is unjust when pampered Hollywood celebrities buy their way out of spending time in jail, when the same offense would put us ordinary folks away for months or even years. Then there is justice as equality. In a just society, everyone is treated equally. We thus consider it such an injustice when someone gets special treatment simply because they are popular or beautiful or rich. In such cases, we ask ourselves, what has that person done to merit special treatment? This brings us to the third type of idea that comes up when discussing distributive justice, namely desert. Justice as desert simply means that justice requires that people get what they deserve. We like to think that in a just world, the guilty are put away and the innocent are left alone. We like to believe that if you work hard, pay your taxes, and follow the law, then you should be rewarded with a good job, a nice house, and a decent existence, where you can pursue the American dream as your heart desires. If you are lazy, criminal, and ignorant, then you deserve nothing. Finally, we discuss justice as rights. Someone is treated unjustly when their moral rights are violated. Here we could ask what one's moral rights are. We all have a moral right to life and liberty. The English philosopher John Locke argued that we have natural rights to life, liberty, and property. In the United States, we have a legal right to free speech, a right to privacy, a right to vote, and so on. We also have other moral rights, such as our right not to be harmed by consumer products. I have a right not to be harmed by the headache medicine I took this morning. So when one of my rights is violated, or when one of these rights is not respected or is ignored, we tend to think of the situation as unjust. Now, these different ideas about justice lead philosophers to argue that the essence or nature of justice is proper distribution. Thus, we call justice distributive justice. Distributive justice concerns a proper distribution of social benefits and burdens. Now, to the ideas above, namely the ideas of fairness, equality, desert, and rights, correspond certain principles of distribution. Now, to fairness and equality, the principle of distribution states that each member of the society is entitled to an equal share of the benefits. To the idea of desert, the principle of distribution states that each member is entitled to benefits in proportion to his or her efforts, merits, or social contribution. To the idea of rights, the principle of distribution states that each member of the society is entitled to those necessities that fulfill his or her needs. These principles of distribution, however, can be problematic on their own right, or come into conflict with each other. Thus, someone who believes that justice requires treating everyone equally, and that living in a just society is living in a society where everyone is entitled to an equal share of that society's benefits, is not counting on the lazy freeloader who lets everyone do the work, knowing fully well that he will get the same share of the pie come payday. Similarly, someone who believes that justice requires getting what you deserve, and who believes that living in a just society is living in a society where only those who contribute or who are qualified can receive that society's benefits, is not counting on someone who cannot contribute due to some physical or mental disability that prevents her from working and contributing, or on someone who is not qualified to work and contribute due to a poor education or socioeconomic class. In other words, this principle of distribution has it that the basic goods and services of the society are going to be distributed by a free economic system itself, which means that if you work hard and persevere, if you are honest in your business and professional dealings, and if you trust in the power of market economics, then the goods and services of the society will find their way to you. This is part of the reasoning that goes behind the libertarian theory of justice, which we will discuss shortly, followed by a theory of justice that seems its opposite, one proposed by the American philosopher John Rawls. But first, a utilitarian theory of justice. Thus, we have three theories of justice: utilitarianism, libertarianism, and Rawls' theory of justice. To begin, John Stuart Mill, the foremost proponent of utilitarianism, held that an act was good so long as it maximized the well-being of society. Justice, then, had to do with maximizing the well-being of society, what he called the general happiness. This maximization of happiness came about by promoting and protecting certain rules or rights crucial to that maximization itself. Now, according to the utilitarian view of justice, the maximization of happiness ultimately determines what is just and unjust. The problem with this view, however, is that it is extremely difficult to know what will promote or maximize happiness. What social sanctions, what violations of one's liberty are fair game when the goal is to make the most people happy? Mill didn't find this criticism troubling. He held, in fact, that only utilitarianism, with its emphasis on the consequences of actions, had a better shot at providing a viable principle of justice than other competing theories. For some, however, the emphasis on social utility means individual interest can be sacrificed for the sake of greater happiness. This is the argument of the libertarians. According to libertarians, utilitarians are willing to restrict the liberty of some to interfere with their choices, if so doing will promote the greater good. Libertarians, as the name implies, identify justice with an ideal of liberty. Liberty is the most important value, and justice consists in allowing each person to live as he or she pleases, so long as doing what you please does not interfere with anyone else's liberty. Thus, we have the libertarian view of justice, which states that justice consists solely in respect for individual liberty. Thus, a libertarian would find following the majority of governmental policies unjust. For instance, the ban on gay marriage, gun control, pornography, drug laws, and most tax codes. We can see why a libertarian would find this offensive. For one, if you are not interfering with anyone else's liberty while smoking marijuana or carrying around your 357 Magnum, then why is the government interfering with your liberty? Or if you are not interfering with anyone else's liberty by marrying someone of the same sex, then why are there laws prohibiting your liberty to do so? For the libertarian, the government's role in society should be minimal, restricted to a night watchman role, where its only function is to protect its citizens against force, theft, fraud, to enforce contracts, and to perform other such basic maintenance functions. The most influential proponent of the libertarian view is a late Harvard professor, Robert Nozick. Nozick argued that all people had a legitimate claim to what he called Lockean rights. Named after the English philosopher John Locke, who again stressed that human beings had a natural right to life, liberty, and property, Nozick argued that these rights were negative, natural, and non-transferable. So the Lockean rights are negative and natural and non-transferable. For instance, life, liberty, and property. What does it mean for a right to be negative? These rights are negative because they don't require anything from anyone else, with the sole important exception that one must refrain from interfering with other people's liberty. Now, these rights are natural because we possess them independently of any social or political institution. It is important to keep in mind, however, that Nozick is not advocating that one do as one pleases without regard for consequences. On the other hand, because everyone possesses these Lockean rights, we must always be vigilant and especially considerate of not interfering in anyone's possession or exercise of those rights. In fact, Nozick's ideal situation would be one where everyone respects everyone else's rights and everyone else. Such is the basis for his theory of economic justice, what Nozick calls his entitlement theory. Now, according to the entitlement theory, people are entitled to their holdings, goods, money, and property, as long as they have acquired them fairly. In other words, if you have amassed a great fortune without violating anyone else's Lockean rights, then you are entitled to that fortune. And because you are entitled to your fortune, you can do with it as you please. You can donate it to the poor, burn it in a bonfire, or squander it on a life of sin and debauchery. What this means for Nozick is that justice is a matter of respecting other people's liberty. Nozick famously illustrates his view with what he calls the Wilt Chamberlain example. Most of you are probably too young to remember Wilt Chamberlain, who played basketball sometime toward the middle of the end of the 20th century. But any other sports star works just as well to show what Nozick means. Let's take LeBron James to illustrate what Nozick has in mind. The gist of Nozick's example is the following. Every time his team plays, LeBron James gets $5 from the price of each ticket sold. Now people want to go see James play. They don't mind the fact that he gets $5 from the price of each ticket. After all, the guy is a highlight reel, and $5 is just a fraction of the total price. It is worth paying those $5 just to see the guy play ball. Now imagine that 1 million people go see James play during the year. Now LeBron James is $5 million richer, and we have no legitimate basis for complaining that the guy is a millionaire. We paid to see him play, and he didn't even have to coerce us or threaten us with violence. We can't say stuff like, I work 60 hours a week, 50 weeks a year for 10 years, and all I make is a fraction of what the guy makes in a year. We can't say that with a straight face because James is entitled to his money for the sole reason that he earned it without coercion or interfering with our liberty. We gave him our money freely. Such an entitlement theory also motivates what libertarians think about the market economy. All market relations, buying, selling, etc., are to be left totally unrestricted. Likewise, interfering with the market in any way represents a serious violation to everyone else's liberty. Take the Martha Stewart fiasco not too long ago. Accused of interfering with the market's free flow by dumping stock on an inside tip, she went to jail amidst public outcry. What the public didn't realize was the fundamental reason why dumping stocks is such a big deal. It is a violation of people's liberty. The average citizen invests in stocks and bonds because they believe that everyone has the same chance of catching in. Thus, I hand my money over to the stock market under the assumption that no one has an upper hand, that the market itself is free from coercion. Because of their emphasis on individual liberty, libertarians insist that leaving people to fend for themselves is what will bring about the most profitable set of consequences for everyone involved. Some philosophers, like Mill and most utilitarians, would say that the greater social welfare is being ignored. Moreover, that exercising your personal liberty is impossible without certain social structures that guarantee it. Thus, they would not object to infringing on individual liberty to make sure those social structures are in place. Others go further still. The American philosopher John Rawls was neither a utilitarian nor a libertarian. relying more on Immanuel Kant and the social contract tradition culminating in Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Rawls argued for principles of justice that would guarantee greater equality and greater opportunities for everyone in society. The essence of Rawls' theory of justice is embodied in two principles, which Rawls believes would be agreed upon by members of a society if they could choose principles of justice that would benefit their own self-interest. Principle number 1. Each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive total system of equal basic liberties, compatible with a similar system of liberty for all. Principle number 2. Social and economic inequalities are to satisfy two conditions. A. They are to be attached to positions and offices open to all on the conditions of fair equality and opportunity. B. Any inequality in society should benefit the least advantaged member of that society. The first principle states that everyone is to have an equal number of liberties. What kinds of liberties? Well, the traditional democratic ones. For instance, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, etc. This principle is important because it guarantees individuals as much liberty as possible, so long as this liberty is compatible with others having the same amount of liberty. What this means is that while my liberty to do certain things, for instance, smoke in class, is interfered with, this restriction on my liberty is compatible with everyone else's liberty, namely that no one else is allowed to smoke in class. This is something that everyone in the original position, as Rawls calls that situation where everyone is acting on self-interest, would agree upon. The second principle is more controversial. The first part of the principle, call it 2A, states that if any inequalities are permitted in regards to jobs and social positions, that is, that some jobs or positions pay more or are more rewarding than others, if these inequalities are permitted, then those positions must be open to all. This suggests something crucial, namely that there must be equality of opportunity in the competition for those positions which bring greater economic and social rewards. The second part of the second principle, call it 2B, is known as the difference principle. The difference principle states that any inequality in society should be to the benefit of the least advantaged member of that society. The difference principle aims to guarantee that the worst that could happen to you should be better than the worst that could happen to you in any other society. Whatever seems unfair or disadvantageous in society must be a result of attempting to privilege the less privileged, or of making sure that the least well-off are better off than the least well-off in any other socio-economic system. In this way, all primary goods are to be distributed equally unless an unequal distribution benefits the least advantaged. With this, we can see Rawls' primary objection to utilitarianism. Rawls rejects it because in the process of maximizing the total well-being of society, it could permit an unfair distribution of burdens and benefits. Ultimately, Rawls contends that society is a cooperative project for the mutual benefit of all, and that justice requires us to reduce the social and economic consequences of arbitrary natural differences between people. In sum, justice, which involves questions of fairness, equality, desert, and rights, and which we have here associated with distributive justice, can be thought of in terms of social utility in utilitarianism, liberty in libertarianism, or social equality as in Rawls.